Video games are good. Sometimes they're great even. And what do you do when a game is so successful? Why, you make a sequel, of course. But how do you go about doing that? Personally, I think there are at least 3 ways of doing a sequel. The first one is the expansive or even true sequel. This is the one that takes everything in the original that worked and expands on it, while getting rid of everything that wasn't 100% fun. This type of sequel is the one that's usually loved by everyone. An example would be the Donkey Kong Country sequels. However, it also runs the risk of making the original obsolete, or streamlining the series too much while abandoning interesting concepts. In this case, it can also turn into a replacement sequel, akin to what Left 4 Dead 2 was to Left 4 Dead 1. The second type of sequel is the half sequel, or the sequel 1.5. It doesn't introduce many new ideas, nor really gets rid of old ones, it just kinda does more of the same. While it gives people exactly what they want, which is more what they already have, it's more of an add-on than a true sequel, but still has its place. Think Doom 2, it's just more. The third one, however, is what I'd like to talk about today, the experimental sequel. This is when developers think they know what works for the game, but because it's still in its infancy, it's hard for them to tell. So in order to expand the series, they'll add features that are experimental in nature. The problem is when these features aren't in line with what the first game established, and if it doesn't meet fan expectations. Especially if other features were scrapped in favor of those unexpected changes. Which is why for the next sequel, developers usually cave in and go back to the original style and create more of an expansive sequel to meet fan demand, almost like an apology. This is the most controversial type of sequel, and for good reasons. However, in this video, I'd like to argue that even those sequels have their place and are just as important as the others. And to demonstrate that, I will be using 3 games as examples. Let's begin with the one experimental sequel that's probably on everyone's mind. The one black sheep of the franchise that sticks out like a sore thumb due to how different it ended up being. Super Mario Bros. 2. I am not talking about the one commonly referred to as the Lost Levels, since that one was more of a sequel 1.5 and didn't add anything aside from horribly unfair level design. The game I am referring to is the one also called Super Mario Bros. USA, as it did release in Japan. As we all know, that Super Mario Bros. 2 was originally a part of another game, namely Doki Doki Literature Club. At least that's what I'm guessing, because I kinda fell asleep after the first few lines in the Wikipedia article. Jokes aside, you probably heard the myth that Nintendo just ported an already existing game over to the West, slapped some Mario sprites on it and called it a day. However, it was actually always meant to be a Mario game from the beginning, with heavy emphasis on vertical scrolling, as well as picking up and throwing things. So the intention for the game always was exactly what people ended up getting. However, as I explained at the beginning, the change was just too drastic and sudden, and it's not being remembered as fondly as later sequels, heck, even the original. But I find that very curious, because I'd argue that it added among the most new features to the franchise, not just the platformers but the 3D games as well. Not only that, but I also disagree with the idea that it abandoned previous concepts too much, since it really didn't. What do I mean by that? Well, let's go through the original Super Mario Bros. And look at all the concepts that were established there and made the game special. This is easy since it's arguably the grandfather of platformer games in general. Almost everything it did was successful and special. It introduced a character with a simple movement system that could lead to pretty complex platforming challenges. These challenges were conveyed via linear, horizontal levels that were often filled with level gimmicks ranging from bottomless pits, moving platforms, and level hazards such as fireballs. Other obstacles included enemies with simple or more complex patterns, as well as a boss battle at the end of each world. To fight these enemies, the player was given certain power-ups, such as mushrooms, fire flowers, and stars, by jumping into floating item blocks. On top of that, they could also collect coins and 1-ups, which were often hidden in secret sublevels. It's almost mundane to list all these things, since they're so commonplace in basically every single platformer, especially later Mario titles. However, the question is, which of these made it into the sequel? The complex platforming is still very much present, though perhaps a little bit toned down. However, it is also expanded upon by the introduction of 3 other playable characters that change it in often drastic ways. Luigi's jump is higher, though he has slippery movement. Princess Peach, the best character, can float in the air for a while to aid with tricky jumps, though is slowest overall. Toad is the fastest character, but suffers from having the weakest jump and from existing in general. Mario's Mario. So unlike the first game, there are now 4 distinct ways to tackle the challenges ahead, a step up from SMB's 1 and Lost Levels 2 since Luigi also existed in that game. They even offer difficulty options and player preferences, as some may choose to pick one over the other to make the levels easier or more fun for themselves. Sad levels are still present, though they're not always entirely linear, nor horizontal. Sometimes, the player is required to explore a bit and obtain a key. The game also puts an emphasis on vertical progression, something absolutely unseen in the original. While some players may prefer a more straightforward design, it's undeniable that even later Mario games adopted this more open format for their levels, often rewarding exploration with secret items and hidden zones. While these secret zones don't really exist the same way in this game, it still does feature them via the doorways created by magic potions. The player is still required to take a wild stab in the dark and figure out where the items could be hidden by clues, it's just done less with platforming like in later titles. In regards to enemies, Super Mario Bros. 2 features a ton of variety. In the prequel, you mostly only encountered Goombas or Koopas walking in a straight line. Sometimes bloopers or Lakitu would mix things up with more complex patterns, but it was often very simple. These types of enemies are still present in Super Mario Bros. 2, with ones like Shy Guys and Tweeters only moving left and right. However, other enemies offer up a bigger challenge or even change up the platforming. Pokies are taller, requiring a bigger jump. Ostros and Hoopsters can be used as platforms to get across hazards. Beezos and Pidgeots will fly around like Lakitu, but dive down to attack. Flurries will actively chase the player down, while Phantos will do the same, though only if the player has collected a key. In regards to bosses, SMB1 really only had Bowser with mildly different attacks now and then. SMB2, however, has 6 different bosses with unique attacks and arenas to fight them in. Not only that, but Birdo serves as a mini-boss, ironically being the most similar to Bowser from the previous game. The only real difference and the point of contention is in how you defeat said enemies. In Super Mario Bros., this was done by simply jumping on them or taking them out with fireballs or a star. However, item blocks are entirely absent from this game, reducing the mushroom and star to secret, rare items. The fire flower didn't even make a return at all, and enemies were now invulnerable to being jumped on. This means that the only way to fight enemies was with other enemies, by picking them, or turnips, up and throwing them at each other. This leads to a much slower gameplay than in other Mario titles, as a few seconds are spent pulling and throwing objects around. As it is something you will be doing most throughout the game, it is really the biggest and most influential change to the original formula, and I can definitely see why people dislike it. Heck, even I do. However, here's the important keyword: the original formula. But there was no real established formula at that point. Sure, there were things that worked in that game, but as this series was not a, well, thing yet, it was basically exclusive to it. The only thing Super Mario Bros. Had in common with previous Mario games was platforming, items and enemies, and Super Mario Bros. 2 had those too. Furthermore, this new combat technique was expanded upon in other sequels. Throwing Koopa shells became a staple since Super Mario Bros. 3, and even Super Mario 64 had the player throwing boxes and bombs around. And in a way, throwing enemies was very much aligned with the established fireballs, which is probably why those were taken out in that game. On top of that, many of the concepts that SMB2 expanded upon later became hallmarks of the series. Shy Guys, Pokies, Bob-Ombs and Birdo would go on to be recurring characters, and vertical exploration would be featured in Super Mario Bros. 3, World, and even inspire the 3D Mario titles. And let's not forget that the concept of having different playable characters with their own abilities was a core feature of both Super Mario 64 DS and Super Mario 3D World. It's easy and fun to egg on Super Mario Bros. 2 for being the odd one out, but it's also just as easy to forget how much it added to the series and even the genre as a whole. So that's an experimental sequel where one aspect was radically different, but the rest remained the same and even expanded upon established concepts. Now, however, let's take a look at another sequel that didn't just replace one existing concept with a controversial one, but which replaced just about everything. From one Nintendo game to the next, this is Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. While Super Mario Bros. 2 was still recognizably a Super Mario game, this one was decidedly less so. In that regard, it's not really possible to just take a look at which features were changed, rather which features remained the same. Like the first game, Zelda 2 remained an action-adventure where the goal was to explore dungeons, defeat enemies, and collect items to explore even more dungeons and defeat even more enemies. The rest of the game, however, was almost unrecognizable from the first. The biggest change is immediately apparent just by glancing at the gameplay. That's right, Link was now 16 and not a child anymore. Oh, and something about changing the top-down perspective into a platformer, I guess. This had the unfortunate consequence of limiting the exploration aspect of the predecessor, as exploring levels in a side-scroller setting wasn't as possible as doing so from above. I mean, it is possible, as games like Castlevania 2 have proven later, and the game did keep that aspect somewhat alive in the dungeons, now called temples. However, there's really only so many directions a player can move in if gravity pulls him to the bottom and restricts him from moving to the top, especially with elevators serving as the only way to move vertically instead of stairs or ladders. Well, and falling down to your death, I suppose. The top-down perspective was kept for the overworld map, however, it was heavily simplified and turned into something you'd see more in RPGs like Final Fantasy. Exploration was possible and sometimes even required for progression, but heavily dialed back. The overworld felt more like a brief intermission screen between the actually interesting parts, such as venturing into temples or visiting various towns. This is also where the player randomly encountered enemies to fight, again much like in Final Fantasy. That comparison is adequate, as Link now collected experience points and could level up his health, strength, and a newly added magic meter. Said magic could then be used for magic spells that would give Link's effects such as a higher jump, shooting fireballs, and even turning into a fairy. Presumably, as a result of being able to use those spells, the amount of items the player could use was drastically reduced. The map, compass, fairies, clock, potions, and even rupees were all cut entirely. This also meant that while the player could visit towns, there weren't any shops to buy items from, which also made those towns pretty pointless overall. The few items that stayed were relegated to being key items, as in ones that open up a later part of the game, like a key, hence the name. All combat items such as the boomerang, bow, bombs, and magic rod were cut entirely and replaced with either spells or the new star of the show, the sword combat. That's right, Link was now reduced to merely using his stinky little sword for any and all attacks against enemies. That also meant that bosses didn't have weaknesses in the form of arrows to the eye or bombs to the mouth anymore, but merely sword. Just sword. And I think that sword combat is the key argument as to why this sequel was so important overall. Zelda 1's sword combat sucked, though there were glimpses of the developers attempting to make it more complex, such as the dark nuts that could only be attacked from the sides and back. Zelda 3, A Link to the Past, attempted to expand on this, but mostly by only adding a new stab and spin attack move, as well as letting the player actually swing their sword for once. Zelda 2, on the other hand, was the first game in the series to employ techniques such as high and low attacks, down thrust and jump thrust. The sword skills, as well as the magic spells, were obtained over the course of the game, by having to learn them from dedicated teachers living in various towns. Both learning new techniques and NPCs would go on to be mainstays in the Zelda series. People usually point out how well A Link to the Past implemented these concepts, while forgetting that they were already introduced in its predecessor and it only expanded on them. Likewise, I rarely ever see people compare Zelda 2 to a much more acclaimed game in the series. That game would be the best game of all time according to Metacritic, namely Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. Oh no, wait, it's Ocarina of Time. Ocarina of Time also placed a high emphasis on an expansive sword combat, way more than Zelda 3 ever did. In that one, hitting enemies felt often more incidental than deliberate, while in Ocarina of Time it was the clear focus. Locking onto enemies and strafing and dodging around them was the main strategy in most cases. And much like Zelda 2, it too was a bold new step in a lot of regards. A Link to the Past had just previously gone back to the more open world with less linear progression of Zelda 1, while Ocarina of Time abandoned it yet again in favor of telling a more tightly knit story. And once more, the established top-down perspective was replaced with a more experimental one, this time in 3D instead of 2D. Even other aspects made their way into Ocarina of Time, such as the Triforce of Courage making an appearance, the final dungeon being locked with a spell, the towns being named after the sages, or the other way around really, and of course, fighting against Dark Link, a staple in the series. In a lot of regards, A Link to the Past could be considered a sort of remake of Zelda 1, taking that game's formula and streamlining it, while Ocarina of Time is more of a remake of Zelda 2, just more competent this time. Or at all, really. So, much like Super Mario Bros. 2, Zelda 2 also helped innovate features that will go on to remain in the series as a whole. It's not a perfect game. In fact, it's probably not even a good Zelda game. It's very frustrating and unnecessarily difficult at times, and the fact that so many concepts like items and overworld exploration were just abandoned is simply unfortunate. But who knows what Zelda games would look like nowadays if it never existed? Would Zelda 3 have doubled down on the magic elements? Would Ocarina of Time have revolutionized 3D combat? Would we have ever met Error? This is why I picked this game as an example for why sometimes it's important to completely overthrow previously established concepts in favor of trying something completely new. Because even if it doesn't work initially, it can pave the way for future titles and video games as a whole. Originally, I was going to use Castlevania 2 as an example for this, but I think that's a story for another day. For now, I'd like to take a look at the last type of experimental sequels for today. Haha, I lied! It's actually 2 games after all! And they really couldn't have less in common. I mean, one is a game where you take control of tiny creatures to obtain treasure as an obvious allegory for capitalism, and the other's Pikmin 2. However, what both of these have in common is that they are a sequel that introduced a concept that wildly changed up the gameplay and is regarded as very controversial for that reason. But unlike the other games we took a look at, these concepts were never revisited in later entries in their series. Talking about them is easy because they're basically like the other games. Double Dash is still a racing game and Pikmin 2 is still an RTS light. And a lot of features that were added made it into later games, such as the double item boxes from Mario Kart and the sprays and multiple player characters from Pikmin. But it seems that Double Dash was copying Pikmin 2's papers that day, because it too decided to allow not one, but two characters to ride in a cart together. Oh my god, that's why it's called that! Because they're riding in a cart! This might seem like an inconsequential addition, but it did change up the gameplay a lot. Now, two actual players could ride in the same cart once, which is the feature you only used with that one friend of yours that was bad at driving but you didn't want to feel left out. So, me. But in general, it meant that you now had two items to worry about, as each character could wield one. And my god, were items ever spammed in this game. You couldn't go 5 meters without a banana or a fake item box on the floor, and oftentimes even special items like a star or mushroom. And speaking of special items, every character now had their own item that only they could receive from item boxes. Mario could get fireballs, Birdo could get eggs, Red Koopa Trooper could get the only useful item. In return, there was no strategy involved in which characters you selected. Not only did they influence the weight of the car, but the way you'd be able to fight other racers. Do you select two characters with the same item to be sure to receive it, or do you mix and match to receive two possible playstyles? It's an absolute shame that the system was abandoned, as Mario Kart was already unlike any other racing game. But adding this strategy behind the item system on top of that was the most genius move. Unfortunately, Nintendo will never revisit it either, as they're trying to make Mario Kart more casual and easy to get into. And now watch them release Mario Kart 9 only for me to eat my words. I mean, there are rumors of them wanting to add non-Mario characters with their own unique items, similar to Smash Bros. So maybe they'll make a comeback. However, what isn't gonna make a comeback is Pikmin. Oh, I don't mean the experimental fixture at Pikmin 2, I mean the game in general. What, you really think they're still working on Pikmin 4? Yeah, right. Oh god. But what is that feature I'm alluding to? Well, there's two. The first one would be how Pikmin 2 decided to ditch the time limit of the first game. People often take issue with this, but I always liked it. It meant that I could take my time to figure out the puzzles instead of worrying about collecting at least one MacGuffin a day. Not that it was ever hard, let's be absolutely real here. The time limit was more of a friendly suggestion. But Pikmin 2 also introduced caves. No longer was the overworld the only place to explore, but also partially randomized dungeons. So, with both being an RTS light and now also a roguelite, Pikmin 2 collects the #1 prize for committing the least to a genre. And I don't know, but I just really like them. The fact that you can't get any new Pikmin except in a few cases means that you have to be fully prepared to venture into them. Sure, the layouts aren't anything special or interesting, but visually and atmospherically they shine through and through. However, it's not about what I personally find interesting about the game, though there is a lot and I will almost definitely make a video about Pikmin 2. What concerns me is what these types of Dave-like features mean as a whole. Whether you like them or not, it's undeniable that these two games stand out against the other ones in their series. Why? Because the features present haven't been improved upon by future sequels, since those future sequels don't have them. Basically, every new Mario Kart is better than the last, since it always adds on top of what those games already had, even down to the tracks and racers. So there's little reason to even play the older ones over the newest one, unless it's for nostalgia. Well, all of them, except for Double Dash. Because no other Mario Kart lets you have two racers at once on a kart. And Pikmin 3 might be the best in the series, with Pikmin 1 being the one people are most nostalgic for, but neither of them have the cave system to add variety. I know it sounds inconsequential, but when that one feature is one you really enjoyed, it's definitely a reason to pick it up over the other ones. To make a good sequel, you need to understand what worked in the game and then expand on it. But how do we know what worked? Sure, everyone loved it, but if developers can make the mistake of thinking they know what's best for the game, then so can the fans, right? Bringing both Mario and Zelda into the third dimension was a bold and risky move, one that even a lot of people these days still take issues with. But both of those 3D series are now massively popular, even outselling their 2D counterparts. And sometimes you need to keep the average gameplay the same to not alienate old players entirely, but add something that fills a niche, to get people from that niche interested in the game. And once they're hooked, you can expand on other aspects. Maybe it even works the other way around, and it gets them interested in game franchises similar to that one. That's not good for the game itself necessarily, but it's great for video games as a whole. But what is good for an experimental sequel is when it makes them stand out from other ones. I ask you, what kind of sequel is better? One that complements the original or replaces it? In this case, it would be the one that exists alongside it in a parallel fashion instead of a connected one. It doesn't have to compete with it because it doesn't do the same things. There's only one Zelda 2, only one Super Mario Bros. 2, only one Pikmin 2 and only one Double Dash. They haven't been surpassed because no sequel ever attempted anything like it. So I guess that the moral of the story is that making a sequel is difficult. Sometimes you have a formula that you know works, so you want to make more of it and expand upon it. But there's also times when you aren't happy with the status quo and you want something new. Maybe you want to replace the main gameplay mechanic with another one. Maybe you want to focus on a different set of characters entirely. And maybe you want to start your YouTube channel all over. Maybe people will be unhappy with it, and maybe it will even fail. And that can be risky, and that can be scary. But ultimately, it's about what you want, and what makes you happy. Sometimes these bold steps have to be taken in order to achieve something bigger. And for everyone else, I think it's a good idea to at least give the new direction a try. After all, you never know what you want until you have it. So maybe there's something there to discover for all of us. Hey, thank you for everything. I hope to see you again soon.